regardless of whether you are part of an Islamic culture, you are a practicing Muslim, or you believe in the Islamic traditions, it's valuable to learn about the beginnings of Islam, because today nearly 1/4 of the world's population either is a practicing Muslim or has grown up in an Islamic tradition. Now, the beginnings of Islam really are centered on the life and the revelations of the Muslim prophet Muhammad. Now, the term Islam.
So if we take a look at our timeline, you could see up here the timeline. Can't really show it because this is in the way, but you have Abraham roughly 1800 BC. You have Moses here 1300 BC. Jesus roughly 4 to 30 AD. And then here you have Muhammad around 570. And then the timeline is going to come down. Okay. So it's going to come straight across and down. So just make sure you see that. Okay.
Means surrender. And as we'll see, a lot of the revelations of Muhammad are about surrendering to God, about the oneness of God, about not worshiping idols. And to put Muhammad in perspective on a timeline, I have other significant biblical figures here. And these are important not just to get a reference towards Christianity and Judaism, but because according to Islamic tradition, Islam is built on top of the teachings of Abraham, or the teachings of Moses and the Torah, and the teachings of Jesus. Muslims believe that the Quran is the final testament, so to speak. Now, to get some context, Muhammad was born in 6th century Arabia. And 6th century Arabia was an interesting place. In many other videos, we've talked about various empires around the Mediterranean, around the Mesopotamia, in Persia. And even on this map, in the time of Muhammad, you see significant empires: the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, you have Sassanid Persia. But Arabia was never really consolidated or ruled by a formal, or most of Arabia, by a formal government or a formal empire. The rule of law in most of Arabia, and the world in which Muhammad was born into, was a tribal world where you were protected by your tribe. And it was really the laws of vendetta and revenge that kept certain things in check, but also would lead to a lot of wars and a lot of violence. And within Arabia, there were many folks who are Bedouins, who were nomadic people who traveled through the desert, allowing their livestock to graze on whatever suitable land they found. But you also had settled people in places like Mecca. You had people who'd settled and started agriculture around oases. Remember, most of the Arabian Peninsula is really desert. And Muhammad was born into a very prominent family in Mecca. He was born to the Quraysh tribe. And the Quraysh tribe was essentially in control of Mecca. And Mecca was a very powerful city to control because it was a religious center for the region. This is the Kaaba, which exists today and is a center of Islamic worship. And at the time, it housed hundreds of idols, which were important to the various tribes and people of Arabia at the time. And so you can imagine, as they did the pilgrimage towards Mecca to worship their idols, it also benefited the economy of Mecca in a significant way. And not only was Muhammad born into this powerful tribe, he was born into one of the most powerful clans within that tribe and within one of the most powerful houses within that clan. But even though he was born into this very powerful family, clan, and tribe, his early life was quite difficult. His father died right before he was born. His mother dies at the age of 6 years old. And then his grandfather, who then takes custody of him, and by most accounts, he doesn't get a lot of privileges. When you're a member of a tribe but you're essentially orphaned, the tribe is doing essentially just the base necessities to keep you alive. But then his grandfather dies when he is 8 years old, and he goes under the custody of his uncle Abu Talib. Now, as he grows older, he does learn a skill. He essentially becomes a merchant. He goes on trading journeys with his uncle Abu Talib to places like Syria. And as he does that, according to Islamic tradition, he gets a very favorable reputation. He gets these titles like Al-Amin, the trustworthy one, or Al-Sadiq, the truthful. Now, he continues doing that until the age of 25. At 25 years old, something very interesting happens. A very wealthy widow, arguably one of the wealthiest people in all of Mecca, who runs a vast trading enterprise, Khadija, who is 40 years old, she employs Muhammad and apparently is so impressed by his honesty, by his ability to be trustworthy, that she proposes to him. And remember, she's 40, this would be her third marriage, and he is 25, and he accepts the proposal. Now, this is significant because, as we'll see in this video and the next, Khadija is the first one to follow Muhammad or believe in Muhammad's revelations. So he continues to work with his wife, arguably work for his wife. And then in 610, he's now 40 years old. He is praying in a cave on the outskirts of Mecca. And while he's praying, he is purported to get his first revelation from God, according to Islamic traditions. And that first revelation, and this is the mountain where it is purported to happen, the mountain of light, Jabal al-Nur. This is the cave Hira. The first revelation is proclaim in the name of thy Lord and cherisher, who created man out of a clot of congealed blood. Proclaim, and thy Lord is most bountiful, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not. And so Muhammad, according to Islamic accounts, he's kind of very concerned by this. He does not view himself as a preacher. He does not view himself as someone who should be a prophet. And he goes to Khadija, and he's worried, and Khadija takes him to her Christian cousin, who reassures Muhammad, who tells Muhammad that he believes that he is a prophet in the tradition of Abraham and Moses. And so that, to some degree, makes Muhammad feel a little bit better. And he doesn't have some revelations for a while, and he becomes concerned. But then he eventually starts to have many, many revelations. But he keeps it to himself at first. But roughly 3 years later, he starts to publicly preach these revelations. So these revelations, which really talk about the oneness of God, there's no God but God, it's very appealing, especially to some of the economically lower strata. But you could also imagine it's very, very threatening to the establishment of Mecca. You have to remember, the establishment of Mecca, it revolves around the worship of these idols. And now you have this guy, a member of the Quraysh tribe, the tribe that worships Hubal, the tribe that is in charge of Mecca, that benefits from all these people worshiping these various idols. He's now saying that idol worship is a sin. He's saying that there's no God but God, that all of these idols are false idols. And so the Quraysh tribe, Muhammad's own tribe, begins to significantly persecute the early Muslims. So much so that many of the early Muslims have to migrate from Mecca to the kingdom of Aksum, which was ruled by a Christian king who protects them from the Quraysh tribe. That's now modern-day Ethiopia or Eritrea. And so things are not going well for these early Muslims. They're really they're being targeted by the Quraysh tribe. They're being killed. They're being tortured. And then things get even worse for Muhammad. In 619, you have the death of his wife, Khadija. And just to get a sense of how powerful Khadija was to Muhammad, we have this quote that we get from the Hadith, which are accounts of Muhammad's life and sayings. And it tells us, God Almighty never granted me anyone better in this life than her. She accepted me when people rejected me. She believed in me when people doubted me. She shared her wealth with me when people deprived me. And God granted me children only through her. This is, once again, according to the sayings or the life of Muhammad as accounted for by one of the Hadith. And not only did his wife, who up to that time was his only wife, die and was a significant figure, but in that same year, his uncle also dies. So you can imagine this year 619, often referred to as the year of sorrows, it's a fairly low point for Muhammad. He's been preaching he's been getting these revelations and preaching for around 9 years now, and things are not looking good.
Okay, so there's just an introduction to the life of Muhammad and the beginning of Islam. And roughly, again, he's born around 570, and then it really starts to take off, really starts to rise in roughly 610, 620, okay, or in the 600s. Okay, so let's move on to my notes here. I don't have a PowerPoint. I just kind of created short notes for you here. Islamic civilizations. Does anybody would like to read this for me? Anybody interested in reading Islamic? Okay, Dina Karimi. Sure, Dina. Islamic civilization. Read slow and read loud, okay?
Islamic civilization, geography and trade, crossroads of 3 continents and major trade routes between Mediterranean and Indian Ocean. Pro, trade links and communication. Muhammad, Arabian Peninsula surrounded by great civilizations, Byzantium, Persia, and Abyssinia. Muhammad, an merchant from Mecca, 610 CE, divine revelations, prophet of God, believed prophecies of Abraham, Moses, Jesus. Jews and Christians misinterpreted message. Islam stressed transcendence and unity of God. Critical of Christianity. No Trinity, no incarnation, God into Jesus.
Good, right? So these are the Western, these are the Western religions, right? Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Again, lots of similarities here, right? Especially in the prophets, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. But again, Islam stresses transcendence, but what's critical, no incarnation, no Trinity, very important, right? Okay.
Opposition. Wealthy merchants of Mecca resented sympathy for poor. 622 CE. Muhammad fled persecution in Mecca to Medina. Dating of Muslim calendar. Established Islamic city-state.
622. Yep.
After his death in 632 CE, revelations transcribed into Holy Book of Quran. Quran literally a literal word of God rather than inspired by God. Example in Judaism and Christianity. Attracted former adversaries in Mecca.
Hold on there. Hold on. I just want to post this in here. It's very important right here.
Personal and social religion. Personal. Faith in God, prayer, fasting, alms, and pilgrimage. Social. Quran. Rules for society.
Okay, now we're going to head to the Islamic divide, right? The Sunni versus the Shiites. The Islamic divide. Dina, you can continue doing great.
Who to succeed Muhammad? Sunnis. Majority favored elections. Shias. Minority Muhammad's cousin, son-in-law Ali. Sunnis. Rules for individual and society in Quran follow Muhammad's own conduct. Arabic Sunnah. Shias. Agreed Quran and Sunnah basis of Islamic civil law. Disagreed over content of Sunnah, what Muhammad actually did. Believed Muhammad had picked Ali as his successor. Muhammad's descendants had special insight into faith and should interpret scripture.
Good. So you see here a split, just like very similar to the Great Schism or the denominations in Christianity. There is a split within the religion, right? And here you have a split here, the Sunnis and the Shiites. Good. Okay. Continue reading, Dina.
Authority over interpretation of faith to Ali and his successors, Imams. No whole community as Sunnis believe. Imam hidden since 9th century, scholars serving as imams. Civil law, religious codes. Criminal law, regional customs.
Okay. And now we're going to look at the growth. So Islam really grew probably faster than any other civilization in terms of the date. I mean, it spread so fast, okay, throughout the Mediterranean world, throughout North Africa, okay, and the Middle East. Okay, it's very interesting, the growth of the Islamic Empire. Dina, continue.
Islamic conquest. Arabian tribes forbidden to raid other Islamic communities turned attention outward. 20 years after Muhammad's death, Egypt, Fertile Crescent, Iranian Plateau, later, West, North Africa and Spain, East, Central Asia and India. Umayyad Caliphate, 661 and 750. Prominent aristocratic family from Mecca who had opposed Muhammad. Important leaders in Mecca, settled at Damascus, capital, Arab kingdom. Abbasid Caliphate, 750 to 1258. Descendant from one of Muhammad's uncles, overthrew Umayyad, established caliphate in Baghdad. Height of Islamic Empire, accepted all Muslims regardless of ethnicity and language. Persian administration adopted. Patronized arts, public building, and luxuries. Fatimid Caliphate, Egypt 969 to 1171. Shias, founded Cairo 969. Mosque University of Al-Azhar, oldest institution of higher learning.
So here are three caliphates that I kind of give to you here in order. In the 7th and 8th century, okay, again here in the 8th century as well, and the Fatimid Caliphate in the 10th century. Okay, and next is, these are just notes from the Crusades, which we already went through. Okay.
So were the Abbasids Sunni or Shia?
Sorry?
The Abbasids
I want you to look that one up, okay, Dina?
I think they were Shia, if I'm correct.
So I want to show you now how fast it really is astonishing how fast the empire grew. Like I said, so when we look at Islamic conquest, we look at North Africa. We even look in Europe. Very early, they were able to enter Europe and through the Iberian Peninsula, which is the peninsula of Portugal and Spain. Central Asia, all the way to India, right? The Middle East, Egypt, and Iran, and also even in Sicily, in southern Italy as well. So it really is amazing how fast and how effective these conquests were. Okay, and that's where I want to play this one again, the contextualization of Islam. And this video really goes into the spread, how quick and how successful the spread was in starting in the 7th century.
Here's a passage from the Scottish philosopher, writer, even a little bit of mathematics, historian, Thomas Carlyle. And he wrote this on heroes, hero worship, and the heroic in history. And this is in reference to his view on Muhammad and the spread of Islam. A poor shepherd people, he's referring to the Arabs before Muhammad, roaming unnoticed in its deserts since the creation of the world. A hero prophet was sent down to them with a word they could believe. See, the unnoticed becomes the world notable. The small has grown world great. Within 1 century afterwards, Arabia is at Granada on this hand, at Delhi on that. He's speaking of within 100 years of Muhammad's death, the Muslim empire has spread from what would eventually be southern Spain all the way to northern India. These Arabs, the man Muhammad, and that 1 century, is it not as if a spark had fallen? One spark, on a world of what seemed black unnoticeable sand. But lo, the sand proves explosive powder, blazes heaven high from Delhi to Granada. I said, the great man was always as lightning out of heaven. The rest of men waited for him like fuel, and then they too would flame. And Thomas Carlyle is known as one of the proponents of the great man view of history, that history is nothing but the story of a series of great men who changed the direction in which humanity travels. So what we're going to do in this video is think about whether it really is all about a great man, or were there other things that were in the context of the time and space in which these things occur. This is what the world looked like in the year 600. Muhammad starts spreading his revelations in 610. And so you can see on this map, there's two major powers. The Byzantines, which is the Eastern Roman Empire, the vestiges of the Roman Empire. And you also have the Sassanid Persian Empire. The Byzantines are a Christian empire, and the Sassanids are Zoroastrian. And Muhammad is from the Quraysh tribe, which is in charge of Mecca, which is considered a pilgrimage site for the various tribes of Arabia. But you can see that Arabia is fragmented. This doesn't even do justice to how fragmented it was. But if you fast forward 200 years, you see a major change. And in fact, you wouldn't even have to go all the way to 800. Even by the early 8th century, you see that Islam has spread from the Iberian Peninsula all the way to the Indus.
Look how big the Arab Peninsula. Yes, in just about 150 years. Here's Spain and Portugal. Here's India all the way over here, and everything in between. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Syria, Tunisia in North Africa. Wow.
And most of this, as mentioned, happens within 100 years after Muhammad's death. But let's ask our central question. Why did Islam emerge so rapidly where and when it did? And there's no clear right or wrong answer here. It's all going to be conjecture. But that's what's fun about history. We can think about what we think we know, and then we can debate and think about, are there some patterns here that we see over and over in history? Well, what's the context? So we know for a fact that Arabia was fragmented, that the law of the land in Arabia was tribal and tribal justice. And this is the world that Muhammad grew up in, the various tribes often worshiping different gods. We also know at this time that Muhammad had exposure to other religions, some of which had penetrated the various tribes of Arabia. Most notably, you have Christianity, and Muhammad's wife's cousin was in fact a Christian. And you also have Judaism. These two clearly being related religions, Christianity coming out of a Jewish tradition. We also know that the two great empires here, the Byzantines and Persian empires, are in constant conflict. And in fact, the Arabs and many in the Middle East are the pawns in that conflict. And so you have the Byzantines versus the Persians, with the possibility of those living in their lands might not have been happy with either. There's also the sense that we're at the very beginning of a long decline for the Byzantine Empire. So one thesis could be that Muhammad was able to bring many of the ideas of Christianity and Judaism, but these ideas helped to unify a fragmented Arab people. And not only did it unify them, but it gave them the energy that you can have through religious zeal. And that energy is what allowed them not only to unify in Arabia, and they're able to unify most of Arabia by the time of Muhammad's death, but within 100 years of his death, they're able to take over the entire Sassanid Empire and make major inroads into the Byzantine Empire. And so one argument might be, and I encourage you to argue with me, that they were unified, they had this missionary zeal, which perhaps was only seen in Christianity before Islam. And they were able to take advantage of conflict and discontent between the Byzantines and Persians. in order to spread. Now, another question is, do we see any patterns here? Are there any other examples in history of this happening? Well, the most comparable religion is Christianity, which is today larger than Islam. But Christianity, you have a long period between Jesus, who is the central figure of Christianity, who is the underlying spiritual figure, and when Christianity really spreads and really becomes an empire. And that really starts with Constantine, roughly 300 years after the time of Jesus. What's interesting about the example in this video, the example of Islam, in terms of the religion, Muhammad plays a little bit of both of these roles. He is a spiritual figure. He has revelations, but he is also the founder of an empire. He also governs. He is also a military and political figure. And so perhaps for the first time in history on this scale, you have the combination of religious zeal, of spiritual belief, of faith, combined with governance, combined with the desire to create an empire. In terms of empire, the only thing that might be comparable in terms of the vastness and the speed in which it happens is the Mongol Empire. The Mongols are an example of people who are fragmented initially, tribal, unified by Genghis Khan. And through that unification, we're able to spread incredibly rapidly and take on some long, historic, and possibly declining empires. So I'll leave you there. It's a fascinating question that historians debate to this day. Islam started awfully fast and spread awfully fast. Why did this happen? Was it some unique characteristics of Muhammad? Was it some unique characteristics of the religion? Or, as Thomas Carlyle alludes to, maybe this whole region was just waiting for something like this, something to unify the tribes of Arabia and take on the decaying Byzantine and Sassanid empires.
Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. Thank you, Dina, for reading about the rise of Islamic civilization. We are going to learn more about this during our presentations for the CPT. Okay. So that's it, guys. That's it for today. That's it for today's lesson, as we learned about Christianity, Islam, and which would lead to the Crusades in the 10th and 11th century, okay, or 11th and 12th century, okay. The Crusades starting about 1095 and going to about 1204, okay. So just over 100 years for the Crusades, which is Christianity versus Islam, okay, trying to regain control of the Holy Land in Jerusalem. Okay, so this is your lesson today. I did post the reading for Islamic Middle East, and I encourage you to go through this roughly 20 to 30 pages. It's just a reading. So if you want to learn more about Muhammad and Islam, and more about the religion, Islamic conquest and philosophy, it's all here. Okay, so that's going to be your reading today. I'm not going to assign any additional homework. At this point in the course, your main focus should be on your CPT. Okay, and that's it. Tomorrow will be a complete work period. Okay, tomorrow will be a work period. It's our final day of the week before Easter. So right now you should be focusing on a couple things. Your CPT, of course, and any unfinished, and many of you, I'm still missing a lot of homework, any unfinished homework, okay, from this unit, okay? All right, so that's what you're going to work on for the last about 50 minutes of class. Okay, those of you that want to continue reading about Islam, you have the reading I posted here. Okay. All right. Great job. Great job, guys. We actually got through a lot this course. We got all the way to Islam. Usually I don't get this far, so this is really good. Okay. Are there any questions for me before I let you start working. Any questions? I hope you enjoyed this lesson. There was a lot of interesting things here that you learned today. Okay. Thank you to those who sent me a message for your CPT if you wanted to present. I am now going to look through my messages and I'm going to send some, I'm going to be sending my own messages to those of you who have not told me yet if you're going to present next week. Okay. So presentations are next week and we will start on the first day we're back, which is Tuesday and Wednesday. Okay. So please be ready to present on Tuesday, but you may have to wait until Wednesday. Okay. Okay. All right. If there's no further questions, you can get to work. Okay.